moving to our first real piece, it's digital transformation. So you can see all the buzzwords up here. Having worked myself in business transformation for nearly 20 years and seeing all these words, it makes me realise that actually, what does it mean? People talk about digital transformation, and they have for some time, but still half of the workforce don't know what digital transformation actually means. And in fact, there's a really nice example. I remember back in, I was at Big Four 8 years ago, and I was leading digital transformation in FS for them. And often I'd be asked to go into clients, and they would say, "Oh, Natalie, how do I make my culture more digital?" It's like, well, why are you looking to do this? What's your aim? Oh, I need to be digital. It's like, no, let's try and work out exactly what you're trying to achieve by this. And they couldn't explain it. They just knew it was a trend and something was coming and they needed to be digital. And I think it's really important that we think about, what are we trying to achieve? What's our overall purpose and objective by that? And I really like IMD's definition. So what they say is it's not about creating a digital business. It's about being the best, most agile version of oneself through the use of digital tools and techniques. So I want to talk to you today about digital transformation, but really being considerate of all the pitfalls and how can we be successful within digital transformation. So firstly, do like a stat or two. I thought it was really interesting that in Forbes it says 70% of digital transformations fail. And then I saw another article that said 84, same year in Forbes, that digital transformation fails. And I saw another one, Digital Journal, that said 9 out of 10 digital transformations fail. And I just thought, wow, there's such a huge amount of failure within digital transformation. What's going wrong? Is it that we are learning from fail fast, or are we failing to learn? So I thought it'd be important to, first of all, take you through some of those pitfalls, look at the steps, and then really have a bit of a call to action around what can we do differently. And we'll have those questions set at the end as well. So I'm just bringing up here for you some of the stats around why digital transformations fail. And I thought I'd just have a bit of a show of hands of how many people have been on a digital transformation project, initiative, or been involved at any point. Can you raise your hand? Yeah, fabulous. Yeah, so nearly half of you in the room. And if you look at some of those reasons for failure, they've come from all different sources of, various consultancies, Forbes, McKinsey, Accenture, etc. Any of those resonate with you? So resistance to change. We have that there's actually no clear strategy. People disagree on the objectives. There's a lack of skills. And I think what's interesting is I've worked, as I said, in digital transformation for over 20 years, and it still comes back to the same fundamental challenges that businesses are facing around alignment at the top, resistance to change. So I want to take you through today and think about, we know how to change the tangible. A lot of focus is on data and technology. Well, what are we doing about the intangible to really make this successful? So I'm going to take you through 4 key steps. First one is around aligning leadership, thinking about the clear story and challenge that they have. Secondly, it is about actually thinking around, okay, so what's the operating model? What's the workforce structure we need to be successful? Thirdly, it's really about how do we create the right environment for this all to happen? And fourthly, around the skills. So, first step. Just 3 key things that I wanted you to look at here. And I think what's important is there was actually a Harvard Business Review report last week that said it interviewed 1,500 businesses who had invested over $100 billion over the last 2 years in innovating in a digital way. And as part of that, they said that the challenges that they face were twofold. And there's one here that I'm going to talk about, and then the second one is coming near the end. So the first one is about disagreement of what the goal is of an organisation. I think, that's really key. What we've got here is something from IMD around, actually, is it that people are setting digital strategies and not really thinking about how it aligns to organisation? Why do you need a digital strategy and an organisational strategy? Surely, if your organisational strategy is in place, the digital one should be about really thinking, how do we enable that strategy to work? So that is the first thing that I think is really important to consider. Secondly, not digitizing silos. So I think many organizations, and we talked about it yesterday, we had a conference here around open banking. Many organizations actually are already in silos, and therefore if you are digitizing within those silos, so if you're going into marketing and finance, and each one of those are creating their own project and their own way of working, then actually you're not making the most of collating and working across all of those areas and really getting the benefit, being able to accelerate. So it's so much about working as a collective. So really building on what Alexander was saying about the leadership types you need, actually a core underlying of this is how do you collaborate? How do you work together to really reap the benefits of digital transformation? And then thirdly here, it's about being connected on the change story. I think we're all clear and have seen that actually in the transformations that you may have gone through or have witnessed, if there isn't a clear reason as to why, then you don't get people behind it. So Simon Sinek there, I think what's great for those of you that know his work is how he describes actual, the purpose statement, the why of organizations, and really getting that passion and rationale as to what it is that organizations are trying to do, and being able to use that as a real influencer to bring everyone together. And I think being able to communicate and bringing everyone together on the story is what's key. Okay. Then secondly, we're looking at how do we transform our operations. I don't know if any of you have heard of Frederick. You can't see his name at the bottom there, but Frederick has he's done a lot of work recently around reinventing organizations. So he's on the premise that it's not about command and control, that what we've been taught in business schools, the way that we have always run our organizations and our management team, has been predicated on a very hierarchical command and control type structure. And actually he says in digital times that is not going to be successful because we cannot operate at pace. So everything Alexander was saying about being able to work and move at pace, we're not able to do that in the way that we are structured today. And very much, as you were just, as you surmised at the end, Alexander, about governance, that governance is the real accelerator for change. So thinking about that, he talks about three real leapfrog breakthroughs. He talks about self-managing teams. He talks about the evolution and purpose. And I want to sort of expose on that one a little bit for the moment. So the one about self-managing teams, he says that actually having a boss and a subordinate isn't going to work. It isn't the way that you can really move your organizations forward. That actually you need to work in more self-organizing teams. But I do believe with self-organizing teams that there needs to be an element of a framework. So I think about some of the challenger banks and fintechs. If you're looking at them at the moment, those that have been maybe 4 or 5 years since they started, they've grown at such pace, and they have built on having very agile, small pods and teams, but now they're getting to 700, 800. I think they're really reaching a tipping point where that doesn't work anymore. So they're starting to bulge at the seams. You're starting to see them having issues around culture and structure. And actually, although self-managing teams work, it has to be in a framework, because ultimately it is a living ecosystem, our organizations, and they all come together and work together within that. So I think that's really important. His second point about evolutionary purpose, very much to your point, Alexander, around it's that purpose beyond profit. It's thinking about how we as organizations continue, and we should, what he talks about is sense and respond, moving with the organization forward and seeing where it goes. And then building on to the last piece here, it's about diversity of thought in decision making. So I think we're very good as an industry around ethical diversity, but one thing that we're lacking is around diversity of thought. So our senior boards, how are we going to accelerate if we are still having the same people with the same background, using the same Big Four, coming into an organisation without any new thought? So the shadow boards, I think, is a really good example about how, as organisations, you need to look at those at lower levels in the organisation and bring those ideas and insights to the fore. Moving on to how do we create an environment, and that environment for success. So I think there are three pieces here. I think many of you will know Nadella as the CEO of Microsoft and all the work that he has done in this space, and how he has, as an organisation, has already gone quite far, how he was able to continue to transform the organisation. He was listening to the people, he's creating human interactions with his teams. And I think there are three key points for me here about how we can create those cultures that can continue to evolve and accelerate organisations. The first one is about new working styles. So I think the fundamentals of how we work is going to change. People don't want to work 9 to 5 anymore. People want to be able to have that flexibility of work. And I actually was on a plane back from Geneva was just having a conversation with a gentleman sat next to me, and we had a really interesting debate about, actually, do we see in the future that people only need to work a couple of hours a week? Because actually we're most productive about, I think it's 5.7 hours a day, according to Google. And actually, as part of that, so why do we need to work 5 hours a day or even 5 days a week? So it's about how do we bring to the fore people's expertise and talent to be able to work in a much more flexible way and do it based on outcomes. And I mean, as an organisation, we have 57% of our people that work flexibly, and often we're asked, what is it that you do differently? And I say, I focus on outcomes, I focus on outputs and not inputs. Thinking about what do they need to achieve, whether it's what they need to achieve at the end of the week, at the end of the month, at the end of the project, and build that around that rather than time at desk. Because at the end of the day, making sure people are motivated and empowered to do what they need to do their job doesn't mean you need to watch over them. And what's interesting, we did a piece of research for insurance, actually, where we had 130 people in the room, and we asked them about how their organisation felt around flexible working. 77% said that their organisation saw it as a lack of commitment. And so, you know, you're at this paradigm here where you think people want to work differently, yet organisations, and it may just be that it was insurance, but organisations still see it as a lack of commitment. And so we need to move as organisations that we're able to adapt and change and allow people to work in that way. Secondly is around environment of psychological safety. Again, the work from Google on their Aristotle project saw that actual creation of psychological safety created the most successful and the most dynamic teams. So, you know, we hear that people, you saw one of the stats at the beginning that it was saying that 40% of people had an idea of an organisation, but they didn't raise up their hand and they didn't tell people. So why was that? Well, they didn't feel in the environment that they would, one, be listened to, that they could speak up. And it's often about fear of reprisal. It's about fear of how it might be perceived if you're going to upset someone. So we need to create the environment in organisations where people can have these ideas so that we can accelerate and move at the pace that we need to move in organisations. And then the third one around encouraging a culture of intrapreneurship. So this is really thinking about how do you, when we talked about experimental mindset, how do you create the environment so within your organisation, people are able to share those views and ideas and are able to be intrapreneurs as well as doing their day job. And again, there's a piece of research that said that 20% of those good ideas come from within your organisation. So trying to go externally the whole time, there is hidden talent within your organisation that you should harness. And then my last one for us is around the skills in organisations. So as we're seeing here, transformation is 3 times more likely to succeed when organisations invest in digital talent. And I think we've gone through some of those areas of skills that we had in the list there that Alexander took us through, and where you see critical thinking, I think, was a key one that came up. And I think that's really interesting in terms of actually critical thinking is key. And if you look in the first industrial revolution, it was very much about IQ. Then we started to talk about, in the third and now into the fourth, about EQ. But actually, what we need to move forward is AQ. AQ is about adaptable, being adaptively intelligent, thinking about how you can be resilient, how you can move around an organization, how you can have that growth mindset. And growth mindset, again, it's from Nadella that this quote has come up, but it's always about how do you have that learning agility? How do you move? How do you continue to flex with the times? And creating learning experiences. So this actually with Cheryl from, some of you will know her from Facebook and Lean In. She talks about actually careers are like jungle gyms. They're not ladders. You need to have that lattice. And we know with millennials, 94% look for organizations where they can develop in their organizations. So if you don't create that pathway for organizations where they can move around and they can learn from each other, you're not going to attract the talent that you need today. And then finally around hidden talent. So as I mentioned before, there is a lot of talent in your organization. So how do you bring that up? How do you bring up the silent voice with those ideas? But also thinking about the open talent economy. So we talk about careers being a 100-year career these days as well. We're talking about a minute ago around the bias around age, which I think is so key. If we're going to have 100-year careers, why are we not also looking about what are those careers, what are the second, third types of careers you might have in your 50s and 60s that you want to do, which ties back to the flexible working, because you may not want to work 9 to 5, but you have so much to give in your career and to organizations. So let's think much broader when we think about how we source talent, as well as thinking about whether those people need to be on our balance sheets. Because ultimately, there's all different ways that you can bring talents, partners, and collaborators into your organization. They don't need to be firmly in your organization in the books. So it's thinking much more broadly about your talent of today and how you can bring it out. So those are the key ones. And I just wanted to really finish on thinking about 40% of today's Fortune 500 companies will no longer exist in 10 years. Now, that was taken in 2015. So, many of them are already at extinction, and the rate of extinction will only accelerate. And I think about a client that we're working with at the moment, and we are helping them to think forward about their organization design, about how they move and they accelerate with the changes in their industry. Yet there's so much nervousness to do that. And we're saying, at the end of the day, if you're not bold, if you're not different, if you're not pushing forward now, you will be the next Thomas Cook. You will be the next organization or Kodak, etc., that aren't succeeding at this. You need to be bold. You need to be brave. You need to think about the intangibles and not the tangibles. And you need to do it today. Great.
And it's already 7 p.m. tonight, so you haven't got long left. Apart from that, sorry, I will take questions from the floor now.
Shall we do the little question?
Oh, we've got those questions
button
again. Oh, excellent. Rock and roll.
Thank you. Right, so the first one, to what extent does your organisation possess the capabilities needed to achieve digital transformation? So this is slightly different to what you've done already. So completely, very, somewhat, hardly, not at all. Okay, so if we put that against the numbers and the letters, wow.
That's always the risk of 5 categories.
Yes.
We're in the middle.
Goes in the middle.
That's why I like 4 rather than 5.
Yep.
You've got to choose slightly better than or worse than.
Heading in the right direction. This is good. Next question, what is the biggest people challenge you face in successfully implementing digital transformation? So select 2. We thought we'd vary it up, giving you 2 this time. So alignment between leadership teams, capability and mindset of leaders, clarity on the vision and rationale of change, agreed and aligned transformation initiatives, workforce structures and decision making, resistance to change or availability of talent, or something else. F. Resistance to change. That's almost, oh no, it's 43%. I was going to say it's almost exactly the same as the research.
That's an obvious winner.
Yeah. And 18% around capability and mindset of leaders.
Leadership vision.
Yeah. So interesting. It continues to be the same fundamental challenges that organisations have. So coming back to the first point about being really clear what it is, what the overall purpose is, how you're going to achieve that, and not just seeing it as a tick box exercise, continually supporting people to understand what you're going to do differently and why it's important for them. And I think so much of it as well is people will fear that they are, they're going to lose their jobs, that AI is going to replace them and things like that. So it's helping them understand actually what's going to change and what's the impact for them, and being open and honest. At the end of the day, if things are going to change, not trying to blindside them, but just being really clear on what it is. Okay, last question, I promise. What people priorities have you invested in and gained the most from to adapt to the fourth industrial revolution? So developing leadership capability, attracting and developing digital talent, reshaping your organisational model, or culture and behavioural transformation. Okay, so reshape, interesting. So a lot of organisations have already started to reshape their operating model, as well as looking at cultural and behavioural transformation, which is great to see.
Well, and even B.
Yeah, attracting and developing talent as well. That's great, seeing how that works. Okay, wonderful, thank you. That's really helpful insight for us as well.